Welcome back to the Whispering GM podcast, whispering to you from my pilot on the way to Whole Foods. When it comes to disagreements in the overall hobby, one of the most common is the role player versus the role player. That is, the player who wants to play the role, R-O-L-E, and the player who wants to roll the dice, R-O-L-L. Typically, this breaks down into the gamist versus the immersion seeker. The former accusing the latter of telling stories instead of playing the game, and the latter accusing the former of reducing an otherwise story-generating engine into a board game. But there's a third interpretation, a third argument, that is neglected in these confrontations. Among the definitions of ROLE is a lost secondary concept, the role in the party, not the role of your character. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about role versus roll. As I mentioned before the music, your role player, with an E, is typically stereotyped as the story gamer. They are the ones who, I'm doing what my character would do, while dooming the party. They are the ones who are trying to seduce the barmaid instead of planning for your next adventure. They're the ones who are spending entire sessions haggling and shopping with the various merchants in town, while everyone else thinks to themselves, I don't get to play again for the next 5 days. And while these exaggerations do serve an amusing side game to troll your friends, it misses a fundamental point that the word role has another definition. I want to harken back and read out of Men and Magic, the first of the 3 LBVs for the original 1974 Dungeons & Dragons game.
Future Og dialing in. Reading from Men and Magic, page 5. Preparation for the campaign. Before they begin, players must decide what role they will play in the campaign, human or otherwise, fighter, cleric, or magic user. Thereafter, they will work upwards if they survive as they gain experience. First, however, it is necessary to describe fully the roles possible. The text then goes on to talk about fighting men, magic users, and clerics, the 3 possible roles.
Well, Og, that's hardly given me any room here to write a 9-page backstory about. Well, that's kind of the point. The role, as described, the point of the role in the original game was to identify the purpose you would serve in the party. First off, the most obvious class is the fighting man. The fighting man, or fighter, as it's abbreviated and hinting at their purpose, is the only recipient of all the magic weapons. Additionally, they can use all the magic armor. In the original edition of the game, the fighting man accumulates hit dice more rapidly than the other classes do as a factor of level. In Greyhawk and beyond, the fighting man gets a bigger hit die, so for each of those hit dice, they get more hit points. The fighting man has the best melee damage output in the LBBs, and has the most standing power of the 3 archetypes. That access to armor, that access to weapons, a decent set of saves, and no prerequisites. Anyone can be a fighter. Some might level a little slower, but anyone can be a fighter. With that in mind, I think that the assumption is there's going to be more fighting men in any given group than the other two classes. And that, in and of itself, serves a purpose, because your fighting man is going to be up front. Your fighting man is going to be rear guard at the same time. Your fighting man is going to be the one with the 10-foot pole tapping going ahead. Your fighting man, in the absence of thieves, is going to be the one who takes the brunt of the impact, just because of his implicit durability. With that in mind, because there are multiple fighting men, say I have 10 hit points, the second guy has 8. Once I've lost, 5 or 6, I'm now rear guard, and the 8 hit pointer comes on up. And so you can cycle through, manage your resources, and help to determine how much longer you have in the dungeon, treating your fighting men and their hit points as a sort of barometer. Next, we have the Cleric. I've done a whole episode on why Clerics are not heal bots. However, it would be remiss not to mention healing. The Cleric is a support character. They have the ability to heal, so in the dungeon you can get someone back up on their feet, but I would argue the healing is more of an out-of-dungeon experience. So earlier I mentioned that our hit points, we'd lost 5 or 6 of them. I can wait a week to be back on my feet at a hit point a day, or I can wait a day and benefit from my Cleric's Cure Light Wounds, or Cure Wounds spell. So if you're adding a d6 plus 1 per day as your party's recuperating, that will get your party back in the dungeon a lot faster. Similarly, you look at their other spells, they get fewer of them than their magic user counterparts, but the impact is still there. You have Light. Light will take one foe out of the party, or you can use it on a inanimate object, or to, bring an unblowoutable torch, or save yourself from darkness in that regard. They also have Turn Undead. Turn Undead is a game changer in undead encounters. You don't get rid of all of them usually, but you can take those 3d10 skeletons and turn them into something more manageable. And lastly, while they don't have all the weapons, they have the armor. You have hit points that are comparable to a fighter's for the first few levels. You have fighting capability that are comparable to a fighter's until you really start diverging at the mid-range. And you have armor. So the Cleric can stand in the front. The Cleric can hold his own. And while you're not going to be the party damage dealer, you're also not going to go down that easy. Clerics level quickly, and so they will, you look at the numbers, they keep up. And so the role that the Cleric fills is support. They have features to keep the party moving and extend the resources that you have. Last, we come to the magic user. The magic user, in my personal opinion, is the most nuanced of the 3 original classes, in that it has an obvious role, the blaster, where you have your sleep spell, which is a nuke to end an encounter. You have your fireball, which is a nuke to end an encounter. But also, there's a hidden purpose behind the magic user, hidden in its requirements. The magic user is not able to wear armor or use most weapons. As a result, in both the original edition and in basic, your encumbrance is largely free. The dagger is the lightest weapon, and you're not wearing armor, so you are the pack mule. If you can't afford a porter, you, the magic user, will be carrying most of the treasure. Additionally, you'll be carrying supplies to come in, again, because you aren't purchasing armor or weapons. You have gold to spare at the start. One of my favorite house rules is to allow low-level magic users to craft scrolls, but by the book, you can't craft scrolls before you get to Wizard as your title. So, you have extra money and extra encumbrance that invites player skill. You are playing the class that is designed around inventive inventory management. Further, because of their high intelligence, magic users are going to have more languages. They're going to be able to communicate with dungeon denizens at a greater rate. They're going to be able to read things in the dungeon that are written in archaic tongues. The magic user is a secondary support, but they are limited in the same sense that the cleric is limited. They only have so many spells, but they provide an out-of-combat kind of capability, where the cleric can step up and be a supporter in combat and in recovery. The magic user steps up and is a support character for the adventure and the delve itself. So, am I going to go through all of the classes? And why am I going through all of the classes? Well, no. We've got the first three. There's the Thief that comes next, and there's some other classes in the advanced editions, but Rick Stump over at Harbinger Games did a great blog entry for this, which I will link in the show notes, where he talks about various roles that a character plays in the party based on their class choice. And again, I'll link that, but that's not the point I'm trying to get to. What I'm trying to get to is, this is what the original designers of the game had in mind when they said roleplay. They did not intend for you to speak in character or to do what your character would do. It was a game to them. It was an extension of a war game where, yes, there is some roleplay involved. You are thinking through the perspective of your character, but that's secondary. The primary definition of roleplay, as evidenced by the quote from the beginning of the original game, is not that you are role-playing in a psychological sense, but that you are playing a role in the party. You are not Bob the fighter, you are Bob the fighter. So I guess role play versus role play. To evidence this, we'll roll forward a couple years to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. One of my least favorite rules, training, is tied into one of my second least favorite rules, player ratings. Player ratings were invented, allegedly, by Gary as a way to counteract Ernie playing the magic user wrong. Allegedly, Ernie doing out-of-archetype activity, maybe beefing up, maybe bruisering people, fighting in the front line. That bothered Gary because it did not sit well with the Vancian archetype. If you've read through Vance, that seems odd because Turgeon wrestles, what's her name?
The character name is spelled T'Sais, so maybe to say us this name wrong? I figure you guys are going to tell me that anyway.
The clone woman, he wrestles her to the ground in a very physical display. Similarly, in the Cudgel stories, there is a wizard with whom he travels who impales a thief on a sword, specifically, but that's beside the point. The purpose of the class was to define an archetype and to fill a role, and the player rating system rewards and punishes according to whether or not you're doing it right. If you played a character outside the archetype, according to your DM was encouraged to rate you poorly. The poor rating then caused your training requirements to grow, and the character would be out of the adventure for a longer period of time and pay more gold out of pocket for their transgressions. If there is if there's any evidence that the role was in relation to the archetype and expected behavior of a character by class, then I can't think of one. In my last episode, I talked a little bit about the use of XP as an incentive to make players do a thing. This is the exact same thing. This is the stick end of the carrot and the stick, where we punish you for doing something wrong. Personally, I'm not a fan of punishing players to get them to do something. I always offer incentives and set the goals higher to begin with. Again, that ties into the winning mentality, but at the same time, this ties into the losing mentality. This is the punishment mentality. I'm going to amend my behavior because I don't want my character to fall behind. So, now that I have tossed my cigarette out behind me in a pine forest where Smokey says the rating is red, do I then mean you should not speak in funny voices? No, you're absolutely welcome to speak in funny voices. It's simply not mandatory. If that helps the immersion, if that is fun for you and your table, do it. I'm not here to tell you not to. But what I am here to tell you, what I did want to come across, is Dungeons & Dragons has its roots, and as a result, in consequence, OSR Dungeons & Dragons has its roots, has its heritage in wargaming, in a game, first and foremost, rather than an exercise in improv theater. So, do what you want to do. I'm not here to tell you not to have fun, only to try to say that what the book is expecting isn't necessarily what you might have been taught. With that in mind, are you a role player or a role player at heart?
Hey Taylor, it's Hobbs. The fire-trapped scroll case is the gift that keeps on giving, even though it's almost like a cursed item, apparently.
I've got to get you to kill more of my player characters. I am getting a lot of mileage out of this story.
I'm referring to the call-in from Daniel at Bandit's Keep. Yeah, I mostly agree with him, but as you are aware, in that particular situation, it was a rolled up treasure from, just BX or OSE. I may have adjusted what the spell was because it did make sense, almost like you say, like a first aid area. But I would say that a wizard definitely might have a trapped scroll case in their lab because maybe they found the case and realized something was wrong with it, but they hadn't figured out a way to clear the curse yet. So I guess what I'm saying, very similar to what you did with emergent collaborative storytelling, is we can really rationalize backwards any number of things for any number of situations. And I think that's the beauty of having random tables and trying to figure out why something is the way it is. There's more whys than why, or more why than why. I don't know. You know what I'm saying. Keep up the good work, my whispering brethren, and never go Dungeon Master. Only stay Game Master.
My favorite part of that message is your nod to procedural stocking. I almost never stock without a procedure. Now, sometimes I will move treasures around, sometimes I will tweak spells, sometimes I will consolidate, sometimes I will split up. If I have a large coin hoard, I'm notorious for changing it out for a set of valuable items that equate to the same value, but procedural generation will put a dungeon together in a way, put an adventure together in a way that we as people may not think. So I would never have thought to do X if the dice didn't tell me X was the case. Procedural generation is a brainstorming tool that makes interesting adventures and very curious dynamics, not only with items, but also with faction play. So why are there troglodytes on this side and Neanderthals on this side? Do they hate each other? Do they know each other? Are they in allies? Who knows? We have to figure it out as we go. Why is this scroll case trapped? I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. And that is a wonderful thing that as a dungeon master, when I run that kind of stuff, I don't actually decide but in advance. I roll it up, present it to the players, and then that's the way it is. If it makes sense, more power to it. If it doesn't make sense, that just means there's something deeper going on. And I will not confess as to whether or not the best ideas that the players brainstorm make it into the campaign. Thank you for calling in.
Good morning, Taylor. I have a belated call-in for you on the crunch versus float bait. I remember that, oh man, it's been like 5 months ago or so, but I was running Whitehack for a group, and
you know this is an OSR podcast, right?
Whitehack is a relatively rules-light game. There's like 32 pages of rules in total. But one of the things that attracted me to the system was the fairly free-form nature of it. Much of it is basically decided by the players by the way in which they word their abilities and classes and all of that stuff. And I thought that would be a very nice way to run things, because you could basically say, okay, what kind of character do you want to play? Just define it, and then we can figure out as we go along.
Messing with you a little bit aside, I have played this way. A buddy of mine did this for right after the 3.5 era ended, so before he came out, we played a game where we described essentially who we wanted to be and then built a class around it. The one thing that you want to keep in mind when doing that is to consider the archetype, consider the role of the character, because you don't necessarily want to come in with a Morrowind protagonist. As much as I love Morrowind, one of the things you can do in the Elder Scrolls, you can be good at everything at the same time, and you don't want that in a tabletop game, because that defeats the team dynamic. Now, I guess if you have one player, you can get away with it, but you don't necessarily... Oh, there's a baby carriage. I got to stop and talk to a neighbor. I met a baby. His name is Riley, and he was 2 months early, but he looked healthy, and so we are very excited for the new family. Well, they've been a family for a while, but no new baby. So re-listening to what I had been talking about. So where I was going with that, in a solo game, you could potentially get away with a character that's good at everything, but if you're playing a solo game, I would honestly just recommend running multiple players or player characters per player. But yeah, the point is, you want to fit into an archetype in those kind of situations, because the game is built around archetypes and complementing one another in our functionality. So it's a team sport, and at the same time, material is going to be geared towards it. So if you have a spell sword, that's not intrinsically a bad thing, but the material is going to assume that your spell sword levels at the speed of an elf kind of deal. So to keep it compatible, keep it, and I've talked, I'm not a compatibility Nazi, but the benefit of keeping it compatible, I have talked about before, you get the wash of content.
However, for example, the magic system in that game is basically you decide on a cool spell title, and then at the table, when you want to cast the spell, you go into a discussion with the DM on what the spell does and how much is it going to cost you to cast that spell.
I don't want to interrupt.
And I found that was very...
I do want to say...
let's call it flow breaking.
Boss calling me with those...
And I think, in general, freeform
beautiful chirping birds.
Systems like that have an issue with maintaining flow during play.
A babbling brook.
So, well, belated edition. Otherwise, I agree with everything you and your guest had said as usual. So, take care.
They can be, talking about the freeform spell stuff, that can be immersion breaking too. Because you think about it, you're in the game, you're in the dungeon, you're in the flow, you're in the moment, and now all of a sudden you're having a meta argument with your referee where you're, negotiating for your powers. Meh. So yeah, boss, I knew you were OSR after all, and I tend to agree. The benefit of a system, a procedure, is if you know what you're going to do, then you can do it. Simple as that. And so I think I've done an episode on this before. I don't know if I have not. Let me know, and I will do one. The benefits of procedure. So actually, I did a blog post on this, come to think of it, where talking about splitting the party. Splitting the party is easy if you follow procedure. And so, moral story, it's kind of like driving to work. You know the route you take. You drive the same way every day. Well, maybe not anymore, but because it's become muscle memory, you can think about other things on the way. You can accomplish other things on the way, like podcasting on Bluetooth. Thank you for calling in, boss.
Hey there, I'm first-time caller, M.W. Lewis, listening to your podcast, and I've listened to it before in the past, but feel compelled to call because you touched on a few of my favorite topics. Now, I am way behind on your show, and I'm listening to a March episode where you're talking about the Henchmen, and I believe you actually talked about it prior to that, and really you're doing call-ins about the Henchmen, and I just want to say, huge fan of Henchmen. In fact, I just wrote on the Grog Talk Discord in a conversation about the Familiar, which is not used very much anymore by a lot of players, that I reminded Grog Talk World that Henchmen and Hirelings are not used, and Retainers are not used very much anymore either by modern players. Even old school players of the modern age who, even though they may have played 30 or 40 years ago, it just seems not very popular anymore to use them. Now, I've called into other shows about this, and I might have even mentioned it on my own show, The Worlds of M.W. Lewis. But I just wanted to endorse what everyone else is saying. I think they add a lot to the games. I do think the DM ought to control them as far as loyalty and personality. And I'm about to run out of time here, so I'm going to...
MW, thank you for calling in. We are on the same page for Henchmen. I love Henchmen. If on more than one occasion, I tried to get my old college group to play a more skirmish-esque Henchman-rich game. They weren't into it. Again, thinking about it, if I were to guess, the decline of the Henchmen was precipitated by the rise of grid-based gaming. Miniatures have always been part of the hobby. However, I think that theater of the mind and, moreover, abstraction with an old school, with the oldest school, we'll say, miniatures, you don't necessarily move them around tactically 5 feet this way, flanking, blah, blah. No, it's more of a generalized, I'm in this vicinity. That's why the AD&D combat round is 1 full minute. There's a ton of stuff that can go on, and it's an abstraction. It's not supposed to be a simulation blow by blow. Where in the newer games, BX took it down to 10, 3rd edition took it down to 6, and I think it stayed at 6 from that point on seconds. And at that point, it is a blow by blow. It is a very tactical game. 4th edition was the most egregious in this regard, where you were your token and distances were given in squares. You had specific abilities that allowed you to manipulate the squares around you. So the rise of the miniature, we'll call it, in part, until very recently, miniatures have been expensive. Now, they still are, depending on where you get it from. But I can go online right now and get like 3 dozen PC-looking miniatures for like $3. Or if you have a home 3D printer, that's like I don't even want to think about how cheap that is by comparison to the $5 pewter sprue that someone's tailgating me, sorry. But that $5 sprue that I had to save up pinecone pickup money for a week to afford back in the day. So in part, it's a shift in mindset. I don't think it's the cost of the miniatures that did it. I think it's the shift in mindset. I have to now micromanage this many dudes, as opposed to, okay, 3 of us are in the front rank, and then 3 after that are spearmen. My 2 cents.
So continuing my thoughts on the henchmen, I just stopped because I ran out of time. First of all, Taylor, I think your name is Taylor. I hope I'm not screwing that up.
It is.
Cut that. Please cut that.
You're good.
Before you air this. So the DM ought to control the henchmen, except for letting the players give them assignments, of course. And I would recommend highly that if you don't know what kind of personality to give your henchmen, and you feel uncomfortable making it up, use the Rogues Gallery. The Rogues Gallery from AD&D back in the old TSR days is a great resource, and it has charts with personality traits for the characters in the Rogues Gallery. In fact, I even use the Rogues Gallery to just pick henchmen. And I don't roll randomly. I'll go down those charts. So I'll use my finger and go down the list and find level appropriate henchmen in the Rogues Gallery, and then I cross-reference personality traits, and I build the henchmen based on that information. So that's just my tip to all your callers. Just use the Rogues Gallery. It's a great resource. I actually love that book. And if you don't have it, you get the PDF of it on Drive-Thru RPG, or I found it somewhere else. I don't know how I got it. I think I bought it. I think I bought it on Drive-Thru. It's very cheap. So anyway, I'm really enjoying catching up on your show, and I hope to call in again.
Thank you for the recommendation, the Rogues Gallery. You can actually get a physical copy too on eBay. They're not expensive. I saw one as of this message about $35 to $60, depending on condition. So you can PDF it, or you can get the genuine article from 1980. Thank you for calling in. It was good to hear your voice, and I will look forward to hearing it again.
And that wraps up this episode of the Whispering GM podcast, an independently operated product released for educational and informative purposes under the Totally Steal This license. Some sound effects are retrieved from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit.co royalty-free music license. Others are retrieved from Pixabay and made available under the Creative Commons 0. Theme music is Raw Power, licensed through PlayOnLoop.com. Parties interested in or with questions regarding the podcast are encouraged to reach out via the methods provided on the Cleric Swear Ring Mail blog. Thank you for listening, and delve on.